found the first wildflower on my pillow 3 days after I moved into the summer camp cabin. It was small, purple, nothing special really, just lying there on the white pillowcase like someone had forgotten it. I picked it up, twirled it between my fingers, and looked around the empty cabin. My bunkmate Theo wasn't there. He was never there when I got back from my shifts in the kitchen. I pressed the flower between the pages of the book I was reading and didn't think much about it. Not then. The camp was one of those places families sent their kids for 8 weeks of hiking and swimming and pretending to care about nature. I wasn't a camper though. I was 22, just graduated and completely directionless. My mum had suggested I take the summer counsellor job. Get some air, she'd said. Figure things out. What she really meant was stop moping around the house and do something with your life. So there I was, sharing a cabin with a guy I'd met exactly once during orientation, spending my days chopping vegetables and serving mac and cheese to kids who threw half of it away. Theo worked with the older kids, teaching them wilderness survival or whatever. I'd see him sometimes across the dining hall during meals, always surrounded by campers who seemed to actually like him. He had this easy way about him, always smiling, always patient, dark curly hair that fell across his forehead, tanned skin from being outside all day, and these incredibly kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed, which was often. I'd noticed that about him. He laughed a lot. We didn't talk much those first few weeks. Our schedules barely overlapped. He'd be gone before I woke up, and I'd be asleep before he got back from evening activities. Sometimes I'd hear him come in late, moving quietly around the cabin, trying not to wake me. Sometimes I'd pretend to be asleep and watch him through barely open eyes as he got ready for bed, pulling his shirt over his head, running his hands through his messy hair. I told myself I was just curious about my roommate. That's all it was. The second flower appeared 4 days later. This one was yellow, delicate, with petals so thin they were almost translucent. Again, right there on my pillow. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at it for a long time. This wasn't an accident. Someone was leaving these here on purpose. I knew it had to be Theo, but I couldn't figure out why. We'd barely exchanged more than good morning and see you later. What did wildflowers mean? Was this some kind of joke, some weird camp tradition I didn't know about? I waited up for him that night, sat on my bunk with my book open, not really reading, just listening for footsteps. When he finally came in around 10, I was still awake. He looked surprised to see me sitting there. "Hey," he said. "You're up late." "Yeah," I said, holding up the yellow flower. "Found this on my pillow." He smiled just a little and I watched something flicker across his face. Maybe nervousness, maybe something else. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah," I said. "Second one this week. Do you like them?" he asked. And there was something vulnerable in the way he said it, like my answer actually mattered. "I don't really understand them," I admitted. He sat down on his own bunk across from me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I find them on the trails," he said, "during hikes with the kids. I thought they were too pretty to just leave there, you know. Thought maybe you'd like them." "I do," I heard myself say. "They're beautiful." He smiled wider then, and something warm spread through my chest. We talked for an hour that night, about nothing important, about everything important. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about how he'd been coming to this camp since he was 8 years old. First as a camper, then as a counsellor. I told him about my completely useless degree in English literature, about how I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, about how I felt like everyone else had figured things out except me. He listened in a way that made me feel actually heard, not just waiting for his turn to talk, but really listening. After that night, things changed between us. We started syncing up our schedules, eating meals together, finding excuses to be in the cabin at the same time. The flowers kept coming. Pink ones, white ones, tiny blue ones that looked like they belonged in a fairy tale. I started pressing all of them into my book, creating this strange collection of his thoughts, I guess. His way of saying something he couldn't put into words. I caught myself watching him more. The way he'd push his hair back when he was concentrating. The way he'd bite his bottom lip when he was thinking. The way his whole face would light up when he talked about something he cared about. I noticed how his t-shirts fit across his shoulders, how his hands moved when he talked, how he smelled like pine trees and sunshine and something uniquely him. And I noticed other things too. The way my heart would speed up when I heard his footsteps outside the cabin. The way I'd find myself looking for him in crowds. The the way I'd replay our conversations in my head when I was supposed to be working, the way I felt this strange ache in my chest when he smiled at me, like wanting something I couldn't quite name. I'd never really thought about guys before. Not like that. I'd had a girlfriend in college, dated a few girls in high school. It had been fine, nice, but nothing that made me feel like this, like every nerve in my body was suddenly awake and paying attention. I didn't know what to do with these feelings. Didn't know if I should acknowledge them or push them away or pretend they didn't exist. One night, about 5 weeks into the summer, we were both in the cabin during a rare thunderstorm. All the evening activities had been cancelled, and the campers were having an indoor movie night in the main lodge. Theo was lying on his bunk reading, and I was on mine, supposedly writing in my journal, but mostly just stealing glances at him when I thought he wasn't looking. The storm got worse. Lightning flashed through the windows, thunder shaking the thin cabin walls. I wasn't scared of storms, but there was something about the intensity of this one that made me feel small and vulnerable. "You okay?" Theo asked, looking over at me. "Yeah," I said. "Just a lot of lightning." He set his book down and swung his legs over the side of his bunk. "Want some company?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, and he crossed the small space between our bunks and sat down next to me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that I could smell that pine and sunshine smell that was driving me crazy. "I used to be terrified of storms when I was a kid," he said quietly. "My older brother would sit with me just like this. Made me feel safe." "That's nice," I managed to say, hyper-aware of how close he was, how, if I moved my hand just a few inches, it would touch his. We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the rain pound against the roof. I could feel the tension building between us, something electric that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. I wanted to say something, anything, but I didn't know what, didn't know how to name what I was feeling. "Adrian," he said softly, and the way he said my name made my breath catch. "Can I tell you something?" I turned to look at him, and the expression on his face was so open, so honest, that I felt something crack open inside my chest. "Yeah," I whispered. "The flowers," he started, then stopped. Looked down at his hands. "I'm not good with words, not like you, but I wanted you to know that I was thinking about you, that I noticed you." "I'm glad you did," I said, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. He looked up at me then, and there was something in his eyes that made the whole world narrow down to just the two of us in that small cabin, with the storm raging outside. "I think about you all the time," he said. "I look for you in the dining hall. I listen for you coming back to the cabin. I find these flowers, and the first thought I have is whether you'll like them." "Theo," I breathed, not sure what I was going to say, not sure I could say anything at all. "I know this might be weird," he continued, his voice shaking slightly. "I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, and I don't know if you feel the same way, or if you even can feel the same way, but I needed you to know. I needed to be honest." "I do," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Feel the same way. I didn't even realize it until just now, but I do. I think about you constantly. You make me feel things I've never felt before." His eyes widened slightly, hope and uncertainty mixing on his face. "Yeah, I confirmed. And then I did something I'd been wanting to do for weeks without even realizing it. I reached out and touched his hand. Just that simple contact sent electricity through my entire body. His skin was warm, slightly rough from working outside. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through mine, and we sat there holding hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've never done this before," I admitted quietly. "Been with a guy. Even thought about being with a guy." "We don't have to do anything," he said quickly. "We can just sit here. We can just be." "But I want to," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. "I want this, whatever this is." He smiled then, that beautiful smile that made his whole face light up, and slowly, carefully, giving me every chance to pull away, he leaned in. I closed the distance between us, and when our lips met, it felt like everything in my life suddenly made sense. The kiss was soft, tentative, both of us learning this new language together. His hand came up to cut my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone, and I felt like I was falling and being caught at the same time. We pulled apart after a moment, both breathing hard, both smiling like idiots. "That was," I started, then couldn't find the words. "Yeah," he agreed, laughing softly. "It really was." We spent the rest of the storm curled up together on my bunk, talking and kissing and just being close. He told me he'd known he was gay since high school, that he'd had a boyfriend his freshman year of college, but it hadn't worked out. I told him about my confusion, about how I'd always felt like something was missing but never knew what. He listened and held me, and made me feel like everything I was feeling was okay, was normal, was right. The next few weeks were the happiest of my life. We were careful around camp, not wanting to deal with questions or judgment, but in our cabin, we were just us. He'd leave flowers on my pillow every few days, and I'd leave him little notes tucked into his books. We'd stay up late talking about everything and nothing. We'd fall asleep in each other's arms and wake up tangled together, and every morning I'd think about how lucky I was to have found this, to have found him. But summer camp doesn't last forever. As August approached and the final session of campers prepared to leave, reality started creeping back in. I had to figure out what I was doing with my life. Theo had grad school starting in September, 3 states away. We'd been living in this perfect bubble, but bubbles always burst. We didn't talk about it at first, just enjoyed each day as it came. But one night, 2 days before camp ended, he brought it up. "What happens after this?" he asked quietly. We were lying in his bunk, my head on his chest, his fingers running through my hair. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't want this to end." "Me neither," he said, and I could hear the sadness in his voice. "But I have to go to Seattle, and you have to figure out your life." "Come with me," he said suddenly, propping himself up on his elbow to look down at me. "I know it's crazy. I know we've only been together for a few weeks, but come with me. We can get an apartment. You can find a job there. We can see where this goes." I wanted to say yes immediately, wanted to throw caution to the wind and follow this beautiful man wherever he was going. But I was also terrified. What if it didn't work out? What if I was making a huge mistake? What if I was just caught up in the romance of summer and this wasn't real? "I need to think about it," I said, hating the hurt that flashed across his face. "Okay," he said softly. "I understand." We didn't talk much for the next 2 days. Both of us were busy with end-of-summer duties, helping pack up the camp, saying goodbye to campers. But mostly we were avoiding the conversation we needed to have. I spent those 2 days going back and forth in my head, making lists of pros and cons, calling my mum, who surprisingly told me to follow my heart, looking at the pressed flowers in my book and remembering how it felt when he first kissed me. On the last night, after all the campers were gone and most of the staff had already left, I found Theo sitting on the dock by the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He looked beautiful and sad, and seeing him there made my decision for me. I sat down next to him, our legs dangling over the water. He didn't look at me, just kept staring out at the lake. "I'm scared," I said quietly. "I'm terrified, actually. I've never done anything like this. I've always played it safe, always done what I was supposed to do, and this feels anything but safe." He finally turned to look at me, and I could see tears in his eyes. "But I think that's the point," I continued. "I think I've been waiting my whole life to feel something real, to want something enough to be scared of it. And I want this. I want you. I want to see where this goes." His face transformed, hope replacing the sadness. "Really?" "Really," I confirmed. "I'm coming to Seattle with you. We'll figure it out together." He kissed me then, right there on the dock with the sunset behind us, and it felt like a beginning instead of an ending. When we pulled apart, he reached into his pocket and pulled out one more flower. This one was different from all the others, bigger, more vibrant, with petals that looked almost iridescent in the fading light. "I've been saving this one," he said, placing it in my palm. "Found it on the last hike of the summer. Wanted to give it to you at the right moment." I closed my fingers around it, feeling the delicate petals against my skin. "It's perfect," I said. We spent that last night in our cabin, packing our things, making plans, dreaming about our future. I pressed that final flower into my book with all the others, a collection of moments, of feelings, of his quiet way of saying I see you, I choose you, I want you. That was 3 years ago. We're still in Seattle, still together, still figuring things out day by day. It hasn't always been easy. There have been hard conversations and difficult moments and times when we've had to work to choose each other. But every single day has been worth it. I keep all those pressed flowers in a frame on our bedroom wall now. 23 wildflowers, each one a moment, a memory, a piece of the summer that changed my life. Sometimes I'll catch Theo looking at them, smiling that same smile he gave me when I first asked him about them, and sometimes, when I least expect it, I'll come home to find a fresh wildflower on my pillow. He still goes on hikes, still finds beauty in unexpected places, still has that quiet way of telling me he loves me without using words. I always press those new ones into the book I keep on my nightstand, adding to the collection, adding to our story. People ask me sometimes how I knew he was the one, how I knew it was worth the risk. And I think about those first flowers, about the courage it took for him to leave them there, about the courage it took for me to acknowledge what they meant. I think about that night in the storm when everything changed. I think about choosing to be brave instead of safe. I knew because he made me want to be braver than I'd ever been. Because he saw something in me I hadn't seen in myself. Because when I was with him, everything felt right in a way nothing ever had before. Because love, real love, isn't about certainty. It's about finding someone worth being uncertain for. The flowers taught me that. Each one was a small act of faith, a tiny declaration of possibility. He left them not knowing if I'd understand, not knowing if I'd feel the same way, not knowing if I'd choose him. But he left them anyway, and I'm so grateful he did. Because those wildflowers led me to the most beautiful thing I've ever found. They led me home,